The security gate flashed a bright red light. Access denied? Garrett Holloway stared at the screen for a second longer than he expected to. Not because he thought it was broken, but because he suddenly wondered if it might actually be right. The young security officer glanced at the monitor, then back at Garrett with an apologetic smile. "I'm sorry, sir. Your credentials aren't active anymore." Standing beside him, 12-year-old Emma shifted the strap of her backpack higher onto her shoulder. She looked from the gate to her father, waiting for him to laugh and explain that someone had made a mistake. Instead, Garrett simply nodded. "No problem," he said calmly. "Can you tell me what happens next?" The guard looked slightly surprised. Most people argued. Some demanded a manager. Others pulled out business cards or called someone important. This man asked a question. "Before we go any further, I'd love to know something about you. How old are you, where are you watching from, and have you ever found yourself locked out of a place you felt you truly belonged?" The October air carried the first hint of winter across downtown Chicago. Garrett zipped up his charcoal field jacket while Emma tucked her hands into the pockets of her navy coat. 3 years ago, his wife, Lauren, would have reminded both of them to wear gloves before leaving home. Now Emma did the reminding. "Dad, you forgot yours again." He smiled. "I keep hoping your mom will magically appear and hand them to me." Emma rolled her eyes with a smile that looked more like her mother every year. "That's not how magic works." "No? No. That's just called good planning." Garrett laughed softly. She wasn't wrong. They had come to Horizon Infrastructure earlier than necessary. In an hour, father and daughter planned to walk to the nearby lakeside park where Lauren's favorite oak tree stood. Every year on this date, they spent the morning there together. Emma had asked if she could finally see the company her parents had built before the park visit. Garrett had hesitated. For years, he had avoided bringing her here. After Lauren's death, every hallway inside the headquarters reminded him of late nights they had spent chasing impossible deadlines together. Every conference room carried memories he wasn't ready to revisit. So he stepped away from day-to-day leadership, remaining chairman while letting others run the company he once knew better than his own neighborhood. He told himself it was temporary. Temporary quietly became 3 years. Now, standing outside the glass building reflecting the pale autumn sky, Garrett noticed something unexpected. He recognized almost no one entering through the revolving doors. New faces. New security staff. New employees laughing over coffee. The company had kept moving while he had stood still. Emma looked up at the enormous Horizon logo stretching across the entrance. "Were you nervous the first day you came here?" Garrett watched dozens of employees badge into the building without hesitation. "No," he admitted. She tilted her head. "Are you nervous now?" Before he could answer, the lobby doors opened again. A woman in a tailored camel-colored wool coat stepped outside, carrying a tablet and a visitor badge. Her expression was calm, professional, and completely unfamiliar. "Mr. Holloway?" she asked. "My name is Naomi Pierce. I'm Director of Operational Risk." She extended her hand. "I believe we have a situation to work through." Naomi stopped a few feet away instead of immediately offering the visitor badge clip to her tablet. "Mr. Holloway," she said evenly, "before we do anything else, I'd like to explain what's happening." Garrett nodded. "I'd appreciate that." Emma stood quietly beside her father, studying Naomi with the kind of careful curiosity only children seemed able to have. She wasn't looking for someone to blame. She was trying to decide whether this stranger was a friend. Naomi crouched slightly so she was speaking at Emma's eye level. "I'm sorry your morning isn't starting the way you expected." Emma gave a polite shrug. "I've had worse mornings." That earned the smallest smile from Naomi before she stood again. "The system shows your permanent access expired 4 months ago," she explained to Garrett. "Every executive, board member, contractor, and employee has been required to complete a new identity verification process." Garrett frowned. "I never received anything." "You probably did." Naomi turned the tablet toward him. "The notices were sent to your corporate account." Garrett's expression changed. He hadn't logged into that account in months. Maybe longer. Most board materials had been summarized during scheduled calls. His assistant usually printed anything important before meetings. Somewhere along the way, checking the inbox himself had quietly disappeared from his routine. So the badge isn't broken, he said. No. And no one manually disabled it? No. Naomi answered without hesitation. The system did exactly what it was designed to do. Garrett looked through the glass entrance. Employees continued walking inside with coffee cups, backpacks, and conversations about ordinary Monday problems. The building hadn't paused because he was standing outside. Emma tugged lightly on his sleeve. Dad. He looked down. Didn't you always tell me rules only matter if everyone follows them? He laughed once under his breath. I did. A voice suddenly interrupted from behind. There you are. A sharply dressed man in his 50s walked briskly across the lobby, clearly recognizing Garrett. Mr. Holloway, we've been expecting you next month. He extended his hand enthusiastically. I'm Victor Lang, Executive Vice President. Garrett shook it politely. Victor immediately turned toward Naomi. Just let him in. Naomi remained perfectly still. I can't. Victor blinked. You know who this is? Yes. So override the access. I don't have authority to bypass identity verification. Victor lowered his voice. This is ridiculous. Garrett watched the exchange without speaking. Victor tried again. He's the chairman. Naomi's answer never changed. The policy doesn't create exceptions based on title. For a brief moment, silence settled over the entrance. Victor looked genuinely offended. Policies exist to protect leadership. Naomi calmly shook her head. They exist to protect the company. Garrett noticed something unexpected. She wasn't refusing because she didn't know who he was. She was refusing because she knew exactly who he was. Emma whispered, almost to herself. So, she's protecting your company? Garrett took a slow breath before answering. No. He kept watching Naomi. She's protecting the rules. The words surprised even him. Years earlier, he had insisted every security protocol be written with one principle. No individual, not even a founder, could bypass authentication alone. At the time, investors had argued the policy was excessive. Garrett had refused to weaken it. Standing outside his own headquarters, he realized he had completely forgotten about that debate. Naomi tapped her tablet once more. There is another option. Garrett looked up. If you're willing to complete the verification process, I can begin it immediately. Victor threw up his hands. You're seriously asking the chairman to stand here filling out paperwork? Naomi met Garrett's eyes instead of Victor's. I'm asking every person who enters this building to meet the same standard. Garrett looked at Emma. Then at the revolving doors. Then back at Naomi. For the first time that morning, he understood the choice in front of him wasn't whether to walk into the company. It was whether he still believed in the company he had once helped build. Garrett looked at the verification screen Naomi had opened on her tablet but didn't reach for it. Can I ask you something first? He said. Of course. When did this policy go into effect? 7 months ago. And everyone had to complete it? Everyone. She emphasized the last word without raising her voice. Garrett slowly nodded. He remembered proposing a zero-trust security model years earlier after a major cyber attack against another infrastructure company. Back then, some executives argued that founders and board members should automatically retain permanent access. He had disagreed. If security depended on trusting the most powerful people, it wasn't really security. Standing outside the building, he wondered when he had stopped living by the standards he once defended. Emma broke the silence. So, if Dad fills everything out, can we go inside? Naomi smiled politely. If everything checks out, yes. Emma seemed satisfied with that answer. Garrett wasn't. His eyes drifted toward the revolving doors again. Hundreds of employees were arriving for work, each following the same routine. Badge. Scan. Walk inside. No one looked important. No one looked unimportant. For a moment, he realized that was exactly how he had always wanted it. A maintenance technician pushing a cart paused near the entrance after recognizing Garrett from an old company newsletter. "Morning, sir." "Morning. You visiting today?" Garrett hesitated. "I'm trying to." The technician chuckled awkwardly, assuming it was a joke, before disappearing into the building. Victor Lang returned from inside carrying visible frustration. "This has gone on long enough." He turned directly toward Naomi. "I'll authorize temporary executive access myself." "I'm afraid you can't." "I absolutely can." Naomi calmly rotated the tablet toward him. "The emergency authorization process requires 2 independent approvals and biometric confirmation." Victor frowned. "Since when?" "Since the board approved the revised governance framework." Garrett noticed something strange. Victor didn't seem annoyed because the process was slow. He seemed annoyed that the process existed at all. Emma quietly watched the adults without interrupting. Finally, she leaned closer to her father. "Can I ask you something?" "Always. If everyone has to follow the rules, why does that man keep asking her to break them?" Garrett didn't answer immediately. Because he wasn't sure the answer belonged to Victor alone. For years Garrett had built a culture that celebrated decisive leaders. Somewhere along the way, perhaps people had started believing being decisive meant skipping inconvenient steps. Maybe that lesson hadn't come from speeches. Maybe it had come from watching executives, including him, solve problems quickly enough that nobody asked how they did it. Naomi received a notification on her tablet. She scanned the message before looking back at Garrett. "Mr. Holloway, while we're waiting for identity verification, you're welcome to remain in the public lobby." "I appreciate that." As they stepped inside the spacious glass atrium, Garrett noticed photographs lining one wall. The company's history stretched across framed images spanning 2 decades. Construction sites, ribbon cuttings, community projects, engineering teams. Near the center hung a photograph of himself and Lauren breaking ground on Horizon's very first regional office. Emma stopped walking. "Mom looked happy." Garrett swallowed. "She was." Emma stared at the picture for another few seconds. "Do you miss coming here?" He looked around the lobby filled with strangers who now carried the future of the company he had once known by heart. "I don't think I miss the building," he admitted quietly. "I think I miss knowing the people inside it." Before Emma could respond, raised voices echoed from the security desk. Victor was arguing with another manager, insisting that procedures were becoming an obstacle to leadership. Garrett turned toward the sound. For the first time that morning, he began to suspect the locked door wasn't the real problem waiting for him inside Horizon. Garrett sat on a bench overlooking the lobby while Naomi coordinated the verification process from a nearby workstation. Emma wandered only a few feet away, reading the timeline displayed beneath the company's framed photographs. "Look at this one," she called softly. Garrett joined her. The picture showed a much younger version of himself wearing a hard hat beside a half-finished bridge. Lauren stood next to him, laughing as wind blew her hair across her face. Emma smiled. "I've never seen this photo." "I don't think I had either." A maintenance employee pushing a cleaning cart slowed down when he recognized Garrett. "Mr. Holloway?" Garrett turned. The older man introduced himself as Carl Benson. He had worked for Horizon for nearly 18 years. "I figured you'd retired," Carl admitted with an embarrassed grin. "I've been around," Garrett replied. Carl nodded toward the security desk. "Things are different now." "In what way?" Carl glanced around before lowering his voice. "People don't argue about the rules anymore." "That sounds like progress." "It would be," Carl answered, "if everyone followed the same ones." Before Garrett could ask another question, Carl excused himself and continued down the hallway. The conversation lingered in Garrett's mind. A few minutes later Naomi returned carrying her tablet. "I've completed the first verification steps. And you'll need one additional confirmation from our identity services team." Garrett wasn't frustrated. He was curious. How often do executives have to do this? The same as everyone else. No exceptions? Not officially. Her answer was careful. Garrett noticed the wording. Not officially? Naomi hesitated for the first time all morning. There have been requests. Requests? She nodded. Temporary overrides. Emergency access. Verbal approvals. How many? I don't know yet. But enough that you remember them. Naomi looked directly at him. Enough that I started documenting every request. Garrett folded his arms. He wasn't hearing about hackers or broken software. He was hearing about habits. Small shortcuts. Tiny exceptions. Decisions people justified because they were busy or important. Emma walked back over holding a brochure she had picked up from a display table. Dad? He looked at her. Did Mom ever break the rules? Garrett smiled sadly. Only when the rule stops someone from being treated fairly. Emma thought about that. So, there's a difference between helping someone and helping yourself. Garrett stared through the glass entrance where employees continued arriving one after another. There is. Just then, Victor Lang strode across the lobby again, speaking sharply into his phone. I don't care what the protocol says, he snapped. Find another way. Garrett watched him disappear into a private elevator. For the first time that morning, Garrett stopped wondering why his own badge had failed. Instead, he found himself wondering how many invisible doors inside Horizon had been opening for the wrong people all along. Naomi stepped away to answer a call from the Identity Services team, leaving Garrett and Emma near the reception desk. The lobby had settled into its normal rhythm. Employees hurried toward elevators, delivery drivers signed electronic logs, and visitors checked in without giving much thought to the procedures around them. Garrett found himself watching the security officers instead. They weren't intimidating. They greeted people by name, answered questions, and patiently explained policies to anyone who seemed confused. It struck him that they spent every day enforcing standards for people who rarely noticed they existed. Emma leaned against his arm. They seem nice. They do. So why does everyone act like they're in the way? Garrett smiled faintly. Because rules are invisible when they help you, and very noticeable when they slow you down. Before Emma could answer, raised voices echoed across the lobby again. Victor Lang emerged from a hallway with another executive, a regional operations manager named Denise Carter. Neither looked pleased. Victor walked directly toward the security desk. I've wasted enough time, he said. Open executive access. One of the security officers, a young man whose badge read Evan Brooks, remained calm. Mr. Lang, emergency access requires 2 independent authorizations. You have mine. I still need the second approval. Victor's expression hardened. You work for this company. I do. Then do your job. I am. Several employees slowed as they passed, sensing the growing tension but pretending not to stare. Naomi returned just in time to hear the conversation. Mr. Lang, she said evenly. Identity Services is processing Mr. Holloway's verification now. There is no operational emergency. Victor turned toward her. The emergency is that the chairman is standing in the lobby. Garrett finally spoke. I'm standing here because my credentials expired. Victor waved dismissively. That's beside the point. No, Garrett replied quietly. That's exactly the point. For a brief moment, no one spoke. Victor looked frustrated that Garrett wasn't helping him end the conversation. Instead, Garrett folded his hands and simply waited. Denise stepped closer to the security desk. There has to be a practical solution. There is, Naomi answered. She pointed toward the verification screen. We complete the process. Victor laughed without humor. You've turned common sense into paperwork. Naomi didn't react. We've turned access into accountability. Victor reached across the counter and tapped the terminal with one finger. Then bypass it. Evan didn't move. I can't. You won't. I won't violate policy. Victor looked around the lobby, suddenly aware of how many people were listening. "Do you understand who you're saying no to?" Evan nodded. "Yes, sir." "And you're comfortable with that?" The young officer took a careful breath before answering. "I'm comfortable following the procedure I was trained to follow." Garrett watched the exchange with growing unease. Years ago, he had proudly told new managers that culture wasn't measured by mission statements on conference room walls. It was measured by the decisions people made when someone powerful asked them to bend the rules. At the time, it had sounded like a leadership lesson. Now it felt like a test he hadn't expected to witness. Naomi's tablet chimed. She glanced at the notification, then looked toward Garrett. "The verification team has confirmed your identity." Emma smiled immediately. "So we're done?" "Almost," Naomi said. "There's one final biometric confirmation." Victor threw both hands into the air. "Enough." He turned back toward Evan. "I'm instructing you as Executive Vice President to unlock executive access immediately." Evan remained perfectly still. "I can't accept a verbal override." "You can if I tell you to." "I can't." Victor's voice dropped lower, colder. "If you refuse a direct executive instruction, don't expect to be wearing that badge tomorrow." The words hung over the lobby. Emma instinctively moved closer to her father. Garrett looked at the frightened expression on the young officer's face. Evan wasn't being stubborn. He wasn't trying to embarrass anyone. He was simply trying to do the job he had been trained to do. Garrett realized this moment had become far bigger than a security checkpoint. It was no longer about whether one man could enter a building. It was about whether the people protecting the company's standards could trust that those standards would still protect them. The lobby remained unusually quiet after Victor's threat. No one returned to their conversations. Elevator doors continued opening and closing, but people stepped inside without speaking. Even those who hadn't heard. Every word could feel something important had shifted. Evan kept his hands folded in front of him. He wasn't looking at Victor anymore. He was looking straight ahead, exactly as he had been trained. Garrett slowly walked toward the security desk. Victor sighed with obvious relief. "Finally," he said. "Can we put an end to this?" Garrett stopped beside Evan instead. "What is your name?" The young officer blinked. "Evan Brooks, sir." "How long have you worked here?" 8 months. "Has anyone ever told you to ignore this policy before today?" Evan hesitated. "I don't think I should answer that." Garrett nodded. "That's a fair answer." Victor stepped between them. "Garrett, this has gone far enough. Your identity has already been confirmed." "I know." "Then let's get upstairs." Garrett looked at the revolving doors, then back at Victor. "No." Victor frowned. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean I'm not walking through that door until the process is complete." Naomi watched silently, her tablet resting against one arm. Garrett continued calmly. "When we wrote these policies, we told people they mattered because they protected everyone equally." He glanced toward Emma. "If I ask for an exception now, then everything we've asked these employees to believe becomes optional." Victor folded his arms. "You're making a symbolic point while wasting everyone's time." Garrett shook his head. "This isn't symbolic." He looked around the lobby, making eye contact with employees who had quietly gathered nearby. "This is exactly what culture looks like." Nobody moved. Nobody interrupted. Garrett turned back to Naomi. "What remains?" "The biometric confirmation." "How long?" "About 5 minutes. Then we wait." Emma smiled a little. "I can wait 5 minutes." Garrett smiled back. "So can I." Victor's patience finally disappeared. "This is ridiculous." He faced Naomi. "I'm directing you to terminate this process immediately and issue temporary executive credentials." Naomi's expression never changed. "I can't do that." "You report to executive leadership." "I report to company policy." Victor took one step closer. "I'm giving you a direct order." Naomi answered with the same calm tone she had maintained all morning. "And I'm respectfully declining it." The words landed with surprising weight. Garrett noticed something in the faces around him. People weren't impressed by power anymore. They were watching integrity. A receptionist quietly paused her phone call. A delivery driver stood beside the entrance, pretending to organize paperwork. 2 engineers waiting for coffee stopped talking altogether. No one wanted a confrontation. But everyone understood what was happening. Emma tugged gently on Garrett's sleeve. "Dad?" "Yes?" "If she gets in trouble for doing the right thing." She looked toward Naomi before finishing. "Would that mean the rules weren't really the rules?" Garrett looked at his daughter for a long moment. Children had a way of asking questions adults spent years avoiding. "No," he finally answered. "It would mean the people making decisions forgot why the rules existed." Almost at that exact moment, Naomi's tablet chimed once more. She glanced at the screen. "The biometric station is ready." She motioned toward a secure kiosk near the reception area. Garrett walked over without hesitation. He placed his hand on the scanner. A soft green light swept across the display. Identity verified. Access authorized. The lobby doors unlocked automatically. Garrett looked at the open entrance but didn't take a single step. Instead, he turned back toward everyone watching. "My access isn't the issue anymore," he said quietly. "The question now is whether the people who protected this company today will still have theirs tomorrow." No one answered. Victor looked away first. No one moved toward the elevators. The open security gate remained untouched. Garrett could have walked through it with a single step, but instead he turned to Naomi. "Would one of your conference rooms be available for a board call?" Naomi nodded immediately. "Conference room Cedar is on the ground floor. Visitors can access it without entering the secured workspace." "Perfect." Victor let out a frustrated breath. "This is completely unnecessary." Garrett met his eyes. "No, Victor. What's unnecessary is asking people to violate policies we expect everyone else to respect." Without raising his voice, Garrett took out his phone and opened the board directory. Within minutes, 2 independent board members had answered his request for an emergency video conference. Emma quietly sat in the corner of the conference room with a sketchbook she had found in her backpack. She didn't interrupt. She simply listened. Naomi connected the room's video system. The faces of Margaret Ellis, the lead independent director, and Daniel Ortiz, chair of the governance committee, appeared on the large screen. Margaret spoke first. "Garrett, this meeting wasn't scheduled." "What's happened?" Garrett didn't begin with complaints. He didn't mention being locked out. He didn't describe feeling embarrassed. Instead, he started with a single sentence. "I believe Horizon's security team did exactly what we hired them to do." Both board members looked surprised. Victor, who had insisted on joining the meeting, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Garrett continued. "My credentials expired because I failed to complete a required verification process." Margaret glanced at the briefing Naomi had already transmitted. "That appears to be correct." "It is." Garrett leaned back slightly. "I neglected responsibilities that applied to every member of this organization. The system worked exactly as designed." Daniel nodded slowly. "Then why are we here?" Garrett looked toward Naomi before answering. "Because the greater concern isn't that I was denied access." He paused. "It's that employees who followed policy were pressured to ignore it." Silence settled over the room. Garrett didn't need dramatic language. The facts carried enough weight on their own. Naomi calmly summarized the timeline. She described Victor's repeated requests for verbal overrides. She explained the refusal by Security Officer Evan Brooks. She also documented the instruction to bypass established authorization procedures. Margaret asked only one question. "Is any part of this account disputed?" Victor finally spoke. "I was trying to keep the company running efficiently." Daniel responded before Garrett could. "Efficiency doesn't authorize breaking governance controls." Victor attempted another explanation. "I knew Garrett's identity," Naomi answered respectfully. "So did everyone else." The room fell silent again. That simple statement changed everything. This had never been about recognizing the chairman. It had been about whether rules existed for everyone or only for people without influence. Garrett folded his hands together. I have one recommendation. Margaret nodded. Go ahead. I don't want anyone disciplined for refusing me entry. Agreed. I also don't want anyone rewarded simply because they happened to be involved today. Naomi looked up, surprised. Garrett smiled faintly. They were doing the jobs we asked them to do. Integrity shouldn't be treated like extraordinary heroism. Daniel smiled for the first time. I wish more leaders thought that way. Garrett shook his head. I wish I'd remembered it sooner. He glanced toward Emma. She had stopped drawing and was watching him with quiet attention. For the first time in years, Garrett realized leadership wasn't measured by whether people opened doors for him. It was measured by whether they still felt safe keeping the wrong ones closed. Margaret closed the discussion. The governance committee will immediately begin an independent review of today's events. Until that review is complete, no employment action related to this incident may be taken without board authorization. Victor's shoulders dropped ever so slightly. The decision wasn't dramatic. There were no raised voices. No threats. Just accountability beginning exactly where Garrett believed it always should, at the top. By early afternoon, the tension that had gripped Horizon Infrastructure's headquarters had settled into something quieter. People had gone back to work. Phones rang. Meetings resumed. The elevators moved as they always had. From the outside, nothing looked different. Garrett had learned long ago that the biggest changes inside a company rarely happened with headlines. They happened in conversations behind closed doors and in the choices people made after everyone else stopped watching. The emergency board meeting had ended less than an hour earlier. Victor Lang had left the conference room without saying much. Naomi never celebrated. She simply returned to her responsibilities as if the morning had been another ordinary day. That impressed Garrett more than anything else. She hadn't defended the policy because she wanted recognition. She had defended it because she believed that was her job. Emma walked beside her father as they finally passed through the secured entrance together. This time, the scanner flashed green without hesitation. Access granted? Emma smiled. It feels less exciting now. Garrett laughed softly. That's probably a good thing. Why? Because security isn't supposed to feel dramatic. It's supposed to feel normal. They stepped into the main office for the first time in more than 3 years. The space looked familiar, yet strangely distant. Departments had expanded. New faces filled nearly every workstation. The company had continued growing while Garrett had been standing still. Several employees quietly recognized him. Some nodded. Some smiled. Others simply returned to their work. Garrett appreciated that. He hadn't come looking for applause. He had come looking for perspective. As they walked through the engineering floor, Garrett stopped beside a large digital display showing current infrastructure projects across the Midwest. Dozens of bridges, water systems, and transportation upgrades were progressing at the same time. Years ago, he would have known every project manager by name. Now he recognized only a handful. Instead of feeling replaced, he felt something unexpected. Relief. The company no longer depended on one person. That had always been the goal. Emma noticed him staring at the screen. What are you thinking? Garrett smiled. I used to believe building a company meant making yourself indispensable. And now? Now I think it means making sure the company keeps doing the right thing after you're gone. Emma considered that answer carefully before nodding. I think Mom would like that better. Garrett looked down for a moment. So do I. Later that afternoon, Naomi met Garrett outside a small conference room overlooking the Chicago River. I wanted to let you know, she said. The governance committee has already requested a full review of executive override practices. Garrett nodded. Good. They've also asked my team to help rewrite several reporting procedures. You've earned their trust. Naomi shook her head. No. She smiled politely. The process earned their trust. I just followed it. Garrett couldn't help smiling. There aren't many people who would make that distinction. My father was a firefighter, Naomi said quietly. He always told me that procedures exist because somebody else's mistake already taught the lesson. Garrett thought about that. His own mistakes had taught plenty of lessons over the years. Some had built the company. Others had quietly pulled him away from it. I'm sorry, he said. Naomi looked surprised. For what? For putting you in this position. You didn't. I approved these policies years ago. And today you honored them. Garrett shook his head. Only after forgetting them for far too long. Naomi didn't argue. She simply said, most people don't get a second chance to practice what they once believed. Those words stayed with him long after she walked away. Before leaving the building, Garrett stopped once more at the security desk. Evan Brooks immediately stood. Good afternoon, Mr. Holloway. Garrett reached across the counter. I wanted to thank you. I was just doing my job, sir. I know. Garrett smiled. And I hope no one ever makes you apologize for that. Evan shook his hand with obvious relief. Across the lobby, employees came and went through the security gates without giving them a second thought. Badges scanned. Lights turned green. Doors opened. No one noticed the quiet confidence those ordinary moments required. Garrett finally understood that trust wasn't built by giving powerful people special treatment. It was built every single day by ordinary employees who believed the standards protecting everyone would also protect them. For the first time since Lauren's death, Horizon no longer felt like a place filled only with memories. It felt like a place with a future he could help strengthen, not by standing above the rules, but by standing behind them. 3 weeks later, the morning rush at Horizon Infrastructure looked exactly the way it should. Employees entered through the front doors with coffee cups in hand. Contractors checked in at the visitor desk. Delivery drivers waited patiently for temporary credentials. Security officers greeted familiar faces while helping first-time visitors navigate the process. No one received special treatment. No one expected it. The security gates opened one person at a time. Exactly as they were designed to. Garrett stood quietly near the entrance, dressed in the same charcoal field jacket he had worn 3 weeks earlier. This time, he wasn't there to attend a meeting. He had come to watch. Emma stood beside him, finishing the last bite of a muffin. It doesn't feel like anyone remembers what happened. Garrett smiled. That's the best outcome. She looked confused. I thought people would keep talking about it. They shouldn't. Why not? Because if a company only follows its values when everyone is watching, they aren't really values. Almost on cue, Evan Brooks scanned the badge of a senior vice president. The gate stayed red. Looks like your annual verification expired yesterday, Evan said with the same respectful tone he had used with Garrett weeks earlier. The executive laughed. My fault. He stepped aside and opened the verification portal without a single complaint. The entire exchange lasted less than 2 minutes. No arguments. No exceptions. Garrett watched with quiet satisfaction. Nearby, Naomi walked through the lobby carrying a stack of reports. She noticed Garrett and Emma and waved before continuing toward the elevators. Nothing about her posture suggested she had won a battle. She simply looked like someone doing her job. That was exactly the kind of leader Garrett wanted people to become. The governance committee's review had produced several recommendations. Executive override requests would now require written documentation and independent oversight. Training sessions had been expanded so every employee, from new hires to board members, would review the same security principles each year. Garrett insisted on attending the first session himself. When his turn came to speak, he stood before employees from every department: engineers, receptionists, custodians, executives, interns. He looked around the room before saying the simplest words anyone expected to hear. I owe all of you an apology. The room became completely still. I believed in these standards enough to create them, but I stopped living by them. That's on me, not on the people who had the courage to enforce them. No one applauded immediately. They simply listened. Garrett continued. The strength of this company isn't measured by the authority of its leaders. It's measured by whether every person can trust that the rules apply equally, regardless of title. When he finished, the applause came naturally. Not because he was the chairman. Because he had accepted responsibility without asking someone else to carry it. After the meeting, Garrett and Emma left the building together. Before climbing into the car, Emma looked back at the entrance. "You know what I noticed?" "What?" "The doors don't care who you are." Garrett laughed. "No, they don't. They just wait until you've done what everyone else has to do." He nodded. "And that's exactly why everyone can trust them." As father and daughter drove toward Lauren's favorite oak tree for their annual visit, the city slowly disappeared behind them. Horizon infrastructure remained standing, not because one man had built it, but because thousands of ordinary people continued protecting it every day through honest decisions that rarely made headlines. Perhaps that is the quiet truth people forget too easily. A person's worth is never measured by the size of a paycheck, the title on a business card, the clothes they wear, or the car they drive. Wealth may change opportunities, but it does not determine dignity. Whether someone is a chairman, a security officer, a janitor, a delivery driver, or a visitor walking through the front door for the first time, every human being deserves the same respect, the same fairness, and the same kindness. Judging someone as less important because they appear poor is not only unfair, it blinds us to their character. Respect should never be reserved for the powerful or the wealthy. It should be given freely because every person carries a story, a struggle, and a value that cannot be measured by money. And in the end, the strongest doors are not the ones that keep people out. They are the ones that open equally for everyone who approaches them with honesty.